that? Is this on? Can you just double check for me? What did I do?
Oh, yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon, everyone. The city of Ottawa is located on a unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory whose presence and culture still nurture this territory.
I would like to welcome councillors and media to this technical briefing. We're here to review the Ottawa Housing Needs Assessment, a data-informed report completed in 2024 by Help Seeker Technologies in the City of Ottawa. We have with us here today Jesse Donaldson from Help Seeker Technologies, Cale Brown, the Director of Housing, Clara Ferrier, General Manager, Community and Social Services, and Derek Moody, Director of Planning Services. They will also be available to answer your questions following the briefing. The Housing Needs Assessment is a key requirement for accessing federal infrastructure programs like transit funding and the Canada Community Building Fund. Municipalities with populations of 30,000 or greater must complete this assessment to be eligible for federal funding under infrastructure programs such as Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada, including funds under the Housing Accelerator Fund. This report must be updated every 5 years. The 2024 Ottawa Housing Needs Assessment was submitted to Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada and Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation in March 2025. This report describes the current and projected housing needs here in Ottawa. It examines trends in population, affordability, homelessness, and housing demand. It uses data to identify the gaps that persist despite the current housing response, which points to the need for funding assistance from other levels of government. But providing a strong evidence base and including modeling of future scenarios, the Housing Needs Assessment is intended to help guide planning decisions, inform resource allocation, and support a clear strategic vision for addressing housing and homelessness in Ottawa. It will play an important role in shaping the upcoming refresh of Ottawa's 10-year housing and homelessness plan. The HNA will be made public through the City of Ottawa website. It will be posted alongside a live dashboard, an executive summary, and an FAQ document. After the briefing, I will open the floor to questions from councillors, beginning with one question and one follow-up, followed by a question period for media. If time permits, additional questions will be posed once all members, council members, and media have had their turn. And now I would like to formally introduce Jesse Donaldson, Executive Vice President of Consulting Services at Help Seeker Technologies. Help Seeker is a Canadian company that works with all levels of government to develop data-driven strategies for social issues such as homelessness, housing, mental health, substance use, community safety, and much more. Jesse brings over 15 years of experience working in social infrastructure issues across Canada and internationally, with deep expertise in housing and homelessness. Most recently, Jesse was the lead author of Municipalities Under Pressure, a province-wide study that measured current and future homelessness in Ontario and modeled future needs. I will now hand it over to Jesse to deliver the presentation.
Good afternoon. It's a privilege, can you hear me? Privilege to be here to present the findings of the Ottawa Needs Assessment. At Help Seeker, we've authored hundreds of housing and homelessness plans and strategies, and I can confidently say the City of Ottawa is very far ahead in regards to evidence-based decision-making. And I hope this Housing Needs Assessment adds to the caliber of work that you're already doing here at the City and throughout the community. So looking forward to sharing the findings and walking you through how this might contribute to your understanding of housing needs in the community. What is a housing needs assessment? So one of the most important things to keep in mind, it's a decision support tool. It's meant to pull together all of the data or much of the data available on housing pressures to guide strategy, policy, and investment. It's not a report card. It's not meant to grade performance. It's about providing you and the community with the clearest possible view of current and future needs. The HNA also serves as a song sheet for everyone to sing from the same set of data. So it's a shared evidence base that not only is useful across community or city departments, but also community partners. It doesn't answer every question. We would spend years and years trying to answer every question. But what it does do is give you the clearest possible view of what's happening and what might happen next, so that future strategies, such as the update of the 10-year plan or other housing-related strategies, can build on it. Why do we complete an HNA? Of course, it is a legislative requirement under the Housing Services Act, and it also is required to unlock federal housing funding streams. So the federal template dictates much of the data that's required within the HNA, and of course, the City of Ottawa version not only met but exceeded those requirements. It does support the update of your 10-year housing and homelessness plan. That's how it's intended as per federal guidance, but it's also useful across departments such as transportation, planning, etc. It also aligns with the term of council priorities, which of course City of Ottawa is not unique, but is robust in your commitment to housing. And I hope that some of this data further advances those priorities. Data sources, when you open it and you say, oh, this is 21 data, that's the point. So census is considered the best gold standard data source you can use in HNAs. It is required from the federal template, but wherever possible, we added more current data, either through CMHC rental market data that was available at the end of last year, or really importantly through the City of Ottawa. And you have an incredibly robust source of data, which is sort of one of the strongest quality data sets I've seen, especially around real-time systems usage. So we were able to incorporate a lot of that to tell a deeper picture of what's happening in regards to housing pressures. I'll also note that any of the projections and the planning comes from two different sources. One, it's a HEART tool. So it's out of UBC, endorsed by the federal government, and they require you to use the HEART tool for any population projections. And then the homelessness modeling is a tried and true help seeker tool. We just used it all across Ontario to publish a large study on homelessness in January. And we've also used that with, of course, your local data to bolster the report. Importantly, it is required in the housing needs assessment to do qualitative interviews, though it doesn't say how much. We did do, and the team here did extensive qualitative interviews, not only with people with lived experience, but sector partners. And I had the privilege of doing some of those myself. We ran community conversations and sector engagement. And while you may not see a lot of that in the presentation today, I urge you to go through the report, because we've tried wherever possible to bring this back to beyond the numbers, but this is real lives that are being impacted and how it looks. 3 things. If you only take away 3 things, ending chronic homelessness in Ottawa is achievable, but with the right tools, resources, partnerships, and frankly, investments. Ottawa, you do have a well-developed, deeply affordable housing system, both within the city, but also across community partners. So there's a great spirit and success of community collaboration here, and a sophistication that is not yet present in some of the other communities across Ontario or certainly the country. The issue is that housing needs are evolving faster than you can keep up, that anyone can keep up. So that gives you pressure on affordable housing, supportive housing, transitional, your crisis response, and frankly, pressure on individuals and families who are having to experience housing instability. What we do know across the country and in Ontario, particularly urban centers, is affordability is deteriorating, and we'll show you that today, which increases the risk of homelessness, particularly for low-income and equity-serving groups, and that's something to pay attention to. These pressures aren't unique to Ottawa. You've got a few things that are unique to you, but these are provincial and national trends, and they're going to intensify. So from my perspective and from the vantage of the needs assessment, although not the purpose of the housing needs, I would say this is less so a system design issue, though any system can always be improved. You have a scale issue. The extent to which the housing pressures will continue and escalate over the coming years, next year, 5, 10 years, is so significant that it requires a proportional response. Back in January, we published with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, NASDA, and OMSA, an Ontario-wide report of which Ottawa participated in, to try to enumerate homelessness across the country. What you're seeing, and this is You're not seeing it at all. There we go. Okay, what you're seeing now, hopefully, a small graph, but that's homelessness across Ontario. And so what we found last year is an estimated 80,000 people were experiencing homelessness throughout the year, with significant increase since 2021. So again, your experience isn't isolated. Population growth, shifting demographics, densification, or reshifting the needs. When we did this work, we modeled 3 scenarios. What would homelessness look like in 10 years under a steady economic scenario, a downturn, and an upturn? According to the steady scenario, it's estimated that there may be 165,000 people experiencing homelessness by 2031. Nothing suggests that we're in a steady economic scenario. So unfortunately, the downturn scenario we modeled was nearly 300,000 people experiencing homelessness by 2031. I say that because Ottawa, of course, is an important economic center, an urban hub within Ontario and Canada, and you will feel these pressures intensify, maybe more so than others. So the issue here is rents are rising, wait lists are growing, evictions are increasing, and those inflow pressures, those people who need support, are increasing. You don't have control over social assistance. You don't have control really over market rent, inflation. And so there are all these factors as a municipalities you contend against, but it's important to understand, and that's the purpose of the housing needs assessment, how these factors might put pressure in your system so you can effectively respond to them. Population growth, that's just a big one. So of course, Ottawa's population has grown over 25% in the last 15 years. That puts pressure on all aspects of the housing market. We also saw the older population, older adult population, scooch in here, jumped by 70,000. And that has huge impacts on accessible housing, fixed incomes, support services, the age of your buildings and your ability to support people with diverse physical needs. We also saw Indigenous population more than double, and we know that the census actually undercounts Indigenous identity. So Indigenous housing needs will continue to grow. We also see that 1 in 4 residents is an immigrant, and that's a fast-growing share of households. And we know that pathways into and out of homelessness for newcomers, for immigrant families, are different. And in order to effectively build systems that respond to those, we need to acknowledge those differences. And then the implication here is that demand's growing and it's diversifying. So how do we scale and how do we be responsive to the people who most need it? From 2016, Ottawa added 85,000 households. So to point out the growth, which is a significant driver of housing demand. We saw increases in one-parent families, mostly led by women, grew by 25%. And that also means lower household income, increased vulnerability to stability. So that gender-based analysis is equally important as some of the other pieces of analysis we did. We saw 38,000 new renter households, which means it's a shift towards rental demand. And that's what you'll expect in a growing community of a particular size, particularly in dense urban areas. So you have differential levels of growth pending where you are in the community. This matters because it shapes what kind of housing is needed and at what price point. If you have more households, which you do, on fixed incomes, modest incomes, more single income families, there will be more demand for smaller units, more affordable units, and that changes what the planning trajectory looks like. It also increases competition for affordable supply. So there's a larger and larger group of people competing, frankly, for a smaller and smaller number of units, which has huge impacts on the quality of life of your residents. We do see some changes in your housing. So apartment starts are up 86%. That makes sense as your population grows and densification is required. We saw single detached houses down 32%. So that shift towards higher density housing, apartments and rows is not, I would say dominating, but is starting to take over in regards to new construction. And again, that reflects the demand for smaller, more affordable units among seniors, for example, older adults. This, again, requires careful titration. So who needs housing where? And that's a theme we're going to come back to when we look at the forward projections. Affordability is worsening for low-income renters. Perhaps this is an obvious piece, but when I show you how significant it is, it starts to paint the picture of what's happening. So rents are up 61% since 2014, which has far outpaced income over the same period. When we look here, people paying $2,000 or more a month used to be 1% of the people renting. Now it's nearly 17%. We also see that low-cost rentals are disappearing. So options under $500 a month have been cut nearly in half, from 14% to 8%. This creates particular issues for people homelessness, among people on social assistance. And so as we see fewer and fewer of these units available under 500, that puts immense pressure on people with social assistance, low income, precarious work, part-time work. So the gap between what housing costs and what people can afford is widening, which is driving more residents into housing need and risk of homelessness. Core housing need, that means that someone is living in unsuitable, unaffordable, or inadequate housing, and they don't have the financial means in your community to live somewhere else. And that's considered one of the most reliable indicators of risk of housing need. What we saw in the housing needs assessment is nearly 1 in 4 renters fall into this category. However, and you actually saw this go down from 2016 to 2021. It's now widely understood the reason it went down in Ottawa and all communities is because the one-time temporary CERB payments that were coming out. So people found themselves no longer in core housing need. It's now believed that this rate of core housing need far exceeds current levels and what they were in 2016. This isn't also distributed equally, so important here, this race-based analysis looking at who's most impacted by core housing need. We can see 27.9% of migrant-led households are in core housing need, 25% of refugee claimants, 24.5% of single mother-led households, and 21% of Black-led households. Now we talk about the pressures on the system. Where in the housing needs assessment were we able to sort of look at that anvil, that pressure that's causing more people to stay homeless? So we have 15,000 households on the wait list, which is a housing wait list, which is a 33% increase since 2022. We also saw 30% fewer households housed since 2021. But I want to stop you in thinking that that's a negative indicator. It's actually not. It means more people are getting housed and then they're staying longer. That's an indication of stability in the system. However, if more people are coming in and you have fewer places to put them, you then are going to experience an increase of homelessness. So it really is this increase of inflow that's evidenced by the waitlist numbers, driven in large part by socioeconomic factors. That is one of sort of the clearest signals we can see throughout the needs assessment that the scale at which you're operating isn't enough to address the needs. And of course, here we saw numbers but in Ottawa, nearly 3,000 people experienced homelessness in 2024, which was an increase 75% since 2018. This is in line with what we're seeing in Ontario. It's significant, it matters, I'm not brushing it off, but it is consistent with the trends that we're seeing. Demand is growing fastest among families and single adult women, up 49% to 94%. And then we see the shelter occupancy is running at 81%. That's the crisis response capacity is not the issue. It's the lack of movement of people out of the crisis response and more people coming in. So if you have more people experiencing homelessness, not enough appropriate, affordable places to go, you're going to continue to see an increase in homelessness and an overcapacity crisis response system. But looking there really isn't the issue. Of course, diversity in Ottawa is a strength. So too is building systems that respond to those diverse needs. So we can see the data shows clear increases in Indigenous, racialized, and newcomer homelessness since 2018. Why that matters is the drivers, exit pathways, and importantly, the partners involved in responding to homelessness need to reflect that. So of course, in Ottawa, you have a well-established Indigenous-led homelessness response system with great strength from partners and culturally grounded approaches. When we look at newcomer and refugee homelessness, for example, different responses are needed and different partners. So of course, immigration and settlement are federal responsibilities. So the type of government partnerships that are required and tri-level government investment that are required for each type of homelessness is important to look at. When we see chronic homelessness, there's a lot of talk about ending chronic homelessness. What you're actually saying is that you want to ensure that the same number of people are coming in are coming out, and no one is stuck in what's meant to be a temporary crisis situation permanently. So we see chronic homelessness increased 57%, rising to 1,279 people in 2024. Again, that's consistent with what we saw in the Ontario-wide report, which found 51% of people experiencing chronic homelessness. The proportion of chronic homelessness did go down from your previous count, but that's only because the number of people has increased. And so it's important to look at the total number of people who are experiencing chronic homelessness, not just the percentage. Showed a lot about the outcomes and the needs and the pressures, but I do want to acknowledge that progress has been made. And as part of the needs assessment, we looked at your published progress reports and did include that context because it's important. So there are more units, there are more supports. I'm simply here to suggest that, and the housing needs shows they're not at the scale needed. But new affordable housing and supportive housing is coming online through to 2027. That'll have immense positive impact on some of the findings we found in the needs assessment. So chronic homelessness isn't on the rise because nothing's being done. It's that permanent housing and affordable housing isn't keeping pace with those inflow pressures. As I said, it's not intractable, but the scale of the issue is significant and you have key components in place. What's needed now is a response that matches the scale of the challenge and partnerships to do so. That means a sustained focus on prevention to curb inflow, but most importantly, long-term, affordable, permanent housing solutions. Housing needs assessment doesn't prescribe how to get there. That's not what it's for, but it does provide intelligence, a tool of intelligence for the City of Ottawa and community partners to figure out exactly how to get there and the level of need you're working against. Additional progress and kind of evidence that there is investment in solutions that work. I would say the rent subsidies, which are one of the most affordable, effective housing interventions you can have. The increase, the 996 new housing benefits, additional supportive housing and transitional options. And then, of course, 318 affordable housing units completed, 215 people who were living in unsheltered homelessness were housed. That's huge impacts, but not just for the numbers, but for people, families, communities. But to close the gap, those investments need to continue to scale forever over the coming years. Additional progress to highlight was significant rezoning activity, a great example of what's within the control of a municipality to advance housing solutions, including the 6 city-owned sites for affordable housing, and as well as innovative uses of city land for transitional housing conversions, including 230 Queen and 250 Forest Glade. Spend a few minutes here near the end of the presentation talking about future need, and this is a requirement of the federal template to estimate how housing needs would change. So this is scenario-based intelligence. It talks about what type of housing and for who, and most useful when it's paired with the city's own data, financial instruments. There's lots of ways that we project housing need, and this is just one of many ways to do it. I'm going to draw your attention to the continuum here, because if we don't talk about the continuum, we risk talking about housing as this homogenous concept, and we lose who we're building housing for. So on the left, you have emergency and short-term housing, and then on the right, you have market rental and ownership. Everything in between is the focus of the housing needs assessment. So the first set of modeling I'm going to show you is really in that community housing box: supportive housing, social housing, and then deeply affordable rental. The second set of housing projections I'll show you are more on the affordable side. The projection modeling, Help Seeker did create it. We used it, as I said, in the Ontario report, and we've used it over hundreds of communities across the country, but of course, using specific Ottawa data. Next slide. Perfect. We always map a business as usual scenario. There's nothing that tells me that a business as usual scenario is where Ottawa is. But for argument's sake, let me show you. So if no additional deeply affordable, supportive, or transitional housing was built, we would estimate that between now and 2035, or by 2035, there would be nearly 15,000 people experiencing homelessness annually in Ottawa. You're not on that path, but without scaling efforts, it will be increasingly difficult to get ahead. Good news, I told you it was possible. We modeled a reduction scenario. So what would it take to end chronic homelessness? How might we balance inflow and outflow and achieve what you'll hear is functional zero? So with a focus on affordable, deeply affordable units, rental subsidies, supportive housing for people with complex mental health and substance use needs, and then as well as 200 transitional spaces to stabilize, you could reduce homelessness by 2035 to near zero. It also includes a reduction of emergency shelter because, as I said, your emergency shelter capacity is not the problem. It's a representation of more people coming in than are going out. So as you build up those spaces, we modeled a functional zero throughout this. Briefly, I'll go to the right-hand side of the continuum I showed you to talk about affordable housing. So we use the HEART methodology, which is endorsed, encouraged, strongly encouraged by the federal government. And based on that population household growth, which is just one way to do it, Ottawa is expected to reach over nearly 550,000 households by 235. Importantly, what the tool does is show where those income brackets might be. So what we can see is the affordability pressures we've been talking today will continue to increase. So we'll see 3 times more households in very low income, and core housing need, which I mentioned is one of the most important indicators of housing instability, will continue to grow. We estimated in the report here about 130,000 more homes needed by 2035, smaller, denser, more affordable. Whenever we do housing targets, it's really easy to get lost in is it 129? Is it 135? Is it 140? That's not the most important question. The one is, who are we building housing for and what are their needs to ensure stability? And so looking at that 129 is important, but what's more important is how many of those new homes might need to serve very low income. And when I'm talking very low income, 20% or less of the median area income. Apartments are built through private market incentives often aren't reaching that very low income category. So when we modeled this, we accounted for both income and household size. What we saw is 1-person households are also expected to double, and estimated that over 40% of new units could serve low and very low income residents. I'll leave you with next steps. It will serve, I hope, serves you as a shared foundation for collective action, as encouragement that these are provincial pressures, these are national pressures, and that Ottawa has many of the pieces in place to pilot innovations, to show whether those are effective and to scale accordingly. I hope the tool is used for advocacy and strategic alignment and is continued to use alongside all of the assets you have available to you as a community to continue to meet these needs. I'll turn it over to Clara.
Thank you very much, Jessie, for the thoughtful presentation and the important work that Help Seeker is doing across the province and on this needs assessment. And I also want to thank the federal and provincial governments for not only directing us to conduct the needs assessment, but for their funding partnerships to help us address some of the key challenges presented therein. In community and social services and housing and homelessness services alone, over the last year, we've been able to leverage in partnership over $100 million to support our efforts. But as you heard in the presentation, our ability to scale to need is deeply, deeply dependent on the investment from other levels of government. At the same time, I'm very hopeful to hear that Ottawa is actually setting the bar and leading the pack. The findings of this report validate that Ottawa is on the right track, that we are doing and seeing a record-setting development of affordable and supportive housing, and we're expanding the system capacity in very meaningful ways. Guided by our 10-year housing and homelessness plan, we've shifted away from a reliance on emergency shelters and are investing in transitional supportive housing models that offer more stability and dignity. We've introduced for a first time ever in Ottawa, sustainable newcomer reception system to manage shelter inflow more effectively. We've also launched a new governance structure together with the Alliance to End Homelessness in Ottawa, the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table, to ensure that solutions that we do build are co-designed with community partners and grounded in lived experience. A cornerstone of our approach is investing in Indigenous-led housing and homelessness strategies. We're committed to building culturally appropriate anti-colonial systems led by Indigenous partners and alongside Indigenous communities. We're also improving our data infrastructure, enhancing HIFA's data collection, and digitizing our centralized waiting list to ensure we're making informed, transparent decisions and bringing community voices to bear through data. With all that in mind, I'm now going to turn the mic over to Cale Brown, our Director of Housing and Homelessness Services, who will speak in more detail to how we're addressing the needs presented in the Housing Needs Assessment.
Thank you, Clara. So as you've seen, we have a big job ahead of us as city staff and as a community to tackle the
Nous avons
needs.
beaucoup de travail en tant que membres du personnel.
It is possible to end chronic homelessness, and certainly that will be the goal of staff working with our many community partners to do this. As you've seen from the needs assessment, the issues are complex and there are many interlinking factors that need to be put together in order to achieve that reduction scenario. The city plans to do much work in the coming years, supporting our Indigenous community with their individual Indigenous-led 10-year housing and homelessness plan to tackle some of the issues around the overrepresentation we see. We're also going to be working closely with non-housing sector partners such as the healthcare sector to tackle some of the other issues that we see out there in the community, including a mental health and addictions crisis. In order to have holistic, sustainable housing for people, their health-related needs need to be taken care of, and that will be a key target of making sure that we can keep people in their housing and prevent housing loss. We will also be working to improve our data set. As we've heard, Ottawa is already a leader in data, but more that can be done. We will continue to expand our opportunities for public-facing dashboards, so that our various community partners, those working in social services and not researchers, have access to that data to support this community-led initiative to solving our homelessness and housing issues through the 10-year housing and homelessness plan. We also will be working departmentally to work closely with our with our Strategic Initiatives Department on affordable housing development, as well as other infrastructure partners to ensure that we as a city are working together to address these needs. We're also pleased to announce the launch of our Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table a couple of weeks ago, which is a community-led initiative of partners co-chaired with the Alliance to End Homelessness, who will be supporting us taking this community-led approach to driving these issues. So in terms of what's next, our big opportunity of how we're going to be addressing this is the refresh of our 10-year housing and homelessness plan. That will be presented back to Council in Q1 2026 and is being co-developed with that community leadership table. And we will also be doing deep community engagement. We're also closely connected with our sector partners to develop what the targets and metrics that we're looking to achieve in order to get to that reduction scenario. The information that you've seen here today or components of it will also be released in a live dashboard following the session. And we will also be endeavoring to update the housing needs assessment as it's legislated every 5 years. However, we know that real-time data continues to be critical and important, and we'll be leveraging all of the data systems Claire had mentioned in her remarks to make sure that that live real-time data is on the dashboard and accessible to the public and our community partners working to solve the issues. We're also going to be continuing to work with our senior levels of government, helping them understand the needs that we need to get to solve the problem here locally, and ensuring that we are working within our senior levels of government cross-departmentally, bringing in healthcare partners, working across the city in the same way. And together, I think we do have the plan here in Ottawa. We have the motivation, and now we have the structure and an understanding of what we need to do to get there. And we look forward to working with the community to solve this. And I will pass it back to Chair Dudas.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kale, Jesse, Clara, Derek. And I also wanted to mention we have David Wise, who is the program manager for the Housing Accelerator Project here with us today. We're now going to start with questions from councillors. We do have councillors in the room as well as online. So I will ask if any councillors online have a question, put your hand up. Okay. We'll start with a question from Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much, Laura, or Councillor Dudas, and thanks to all of you for being here today. This is the single most useful report I've seen since I've been elected. I want to thank you so much for this because I've asked again and again, what will it take to end chronic homelessness? So I really appreciate this granular data because it gives us a goal to reach for. The only concern I have is in the report, in one of your slides, you mentioned needing 350 supportive housing units to end chronic homelessness. And what I would say to that is, first of all, the condition of people we're seeing on the street is worse and worse these days. The new toxins in the drug supply are leading to a high degree of brain damage. And what we're hearing from practitioners is that even people that come in off the list and they're supposed to be low acuity, they're actually much higher needs. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that 350 number, where it came from, and sort of how we can account for the fact that the longer that people live in poverty or are exposed to shelter, or to encampments, the worse off they get. So, because what we're hearing from our community housing providers is even when they're taking in people that are supposed to be in relatively good shape, they're not in good shape and they're perhaps not succeeding in that housing. So, and also in terms of what you're projecting, I know we need a lot of operational funding when it comes to supportive housing in general. Do your projections account for capital, or do they also account for operating?
Thank you. I'll take the first one. And so one of the important things in the modeling is we don't model a utopia, but we do model an ideal, recognizing that the homeless serving system and municipalities can no longer cover the gap that exists in our health system, essentially. So what it does assume with that 350 is that there's relative and proportional investments in some of the urgent complex mental health and substance use treatment gaps that we're seeing. And so it would be irresponsible for me to model, say that the municipal government or community partners, the homeless serving system have to address all those gaps. It does require sector partnership, but absolutely, I take your point that there's significant gaps beyond that as well.
Thank you. And I'll just add that this was really modeled around what our current planned supportive housing units are in our long-range financial plan. And as we update the modeling with the new 10-year housing and homelessness plan in the next term of council, that will be updated as well. We certainly agree that we need more. We need to keep working on this. And just to speak to your points, the other strategies we are really going to be focusing on this 10-year housing and homeless plan is diversion and housing loss prevention. So as you said, when you're in the shelter system living in, with those acute needs, there's additional trauma cause, which makes it more complex to solve these issues. So that is going to be, again, a huge focus is working upstream. As you saw in the presentation, that's really where we need to be going.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you so much, because what I have been saying repeatedly is if we house the folks in the worst shape, it's going to have the most immediate impact on the safety and vitality of our community, specifically downtown. So I'm very happy to follow up offline with city staff. I want to know what that number is that we need to be advocating for with the province, and sign me up, because we need to hit hard on that. Because as our Auditor General's report showed, the people who are the worst off are not getting housed, and they're the people we need housed urgently. So, and as I say this, there's an encampment in the park across from my street that just popped up 2 days ago. So this stuff is super urgent. Thank you very much. This is the best report that I've seen in a really long time. It's so helpful.
Thank you so much, Councillor Troster. We're going to move to a question in the room. Councillor Carr has a question. It's
okay. Very soft spoken, so I need the microphone. Thank you very much. I'll echo Councillor Troster's comments that the report is absolutely fantastic, and to be able to have that picture of what is needed is extremely helpful. I guess when I look at the statistics, there's a few things that are really alarming to me, and one of them is that the waiting list for deeply affordable housing is over 14,500 households, and that is a 33% increase since 2022. And everything that was indicated in the presentation seems to me that we need to build 3,150 deeply affordable homes in the next decade. I think I understood that correctly. But we know that we're not getting the funding from the upper levels of government. They've cut off social housing. We occasionally get Rapid Housing Initiative funding that's helping us build 32 townhomes in Barrhaven presently through OCH. I appreciate that staff are doing the advocacy to the upper levels of government, but we can't be the only municipality with the need for these deeply affordable units. So where is the support going to be for that? How can we get the federal government to understand that we need to return to social housing to help these people in marginalized communities, vulnerable communities especially, that have the worst statistics? How are we going to get this done? And I'd also appreciate knowing how we compare. You said other municipalities are similar. So this is a nationwide problem. How can we get these built?
It's a good question. And what we're really trying to establish with this, as you've seen, we need a mix of strategies. So one of the big complexities that our senior levels of funding are dealing with is the dealing with the immediate, the people that are there, and doing these long-term builds. So some of the challenges that come around construction capacity, that kind of thing, really limit the ability of new builds we can do, the funding for that, to build at the level of inflow that we're seeing. On our side of things, in terms of how we can advocate for this from staff, when we do our long-range financial plans, when we do our different reports to council, that kind of thing, we do try and highlight what is the best opportunities for return on investments within the funding we have. As part of the 10-year plan, we're also going to be looking at different types of modeling and different types of scenarios in terms of to land on the best type of permanent supportive housing, around housing subsidies. And again, you make a very good point about having long-term assets, but I think there needs to remain a mixed approach to this, but certainly more and larger investments at the federal level and provincial level for new infrastructure is, as you can see, very desperately needed as well as part of the strategy.
So, Councillor, you can have one more follow-up question.
Yeah, I would just be curious in understanding from Jesse, assuming your work encompasses more than just Ottawa, given this amazing area of expertise, how are we figuring compared to other municipalities in Ontario? Like, you spoke a little bit about the progress that we're making, but how are we doing?
So there are similarities and differences. So in some ways, you are not unique in the level of need. It is not outsized relative to other communities. You have a double-edged sword because you actually do have more resources than some communities. So that's two things. One, it's an asset, but what also happens is it draws people in from resource deficit areas, essentially. So as you build more people will come, not just from Ontario, but from across the country. And we should be proud of that. We should accept that. That's not something that we should be discouraging. But that is something unique. You're also a community of communities in some ways. And we were just having a conversation. You function much more sort of like a region in some ways, because there's huge differences between the needs of people in different neighborhoods. You're facing immense population growth. Your affordability pressures have really kind of exploded. And there's affordability is worsening everywhere. But because you are an important economic center, a large community in Ontario, that also makes an impact. And so those, I think, are some of the similarities and differences that I would see.
Thank you very much. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dudas. Jesse, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. This is really valuable data. I think I want to explore with Councillor Troster and yourselves at some point the assumptions behind your projections for supportive housing. So Ariel's asked those questions, and I'll pivot instead to the other question I had, which is around your assumptions on future housing affordability and rents. You touched on the replacement of existing affordable housing with new private market housing that is denser and newer. That newer, denser housing is not rent controlled. What are your assumptions about what rents are going to do over the next decade?
Thank you for that question. And that was actually one of the most interesting findings for me. And I don't mean interesting flippantly, but when we look at the average rent of vacant units versus the average rent of non-vacant units, the average rent actually sort of masks how bad the affordability situation is, because the units that are available aren't subject to rent control and that sort of thing. So they're much higher. So within the HARP modeling tool, that's where we did some of the projections on income, et cetera. So they're not formally represented in there, but of course, absolutely, I agree that rents will increase, and the impact of removing rent control several years ago has had no doubt an impact on affordability overall.
If there were rent control, would your assumptions about future housing needs be different?
It's an interesting question. I'll have to do some math on that one.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation. Thanks, Chair Dudas.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chair. So for me, in an outer urban neighborhood, I sort of told my own story with many of the stats that I saw from slide to slide. And what was really coming up for me was the impending competition between seniors living on fixed income and all other communities that are also looking for affordable units. And I'm not certain that this question is directed to Jesse as much as it might be to Kale and Clara, so I hope that's permissible. But I'm thinking about, how tactical the city was in creating a newcomer reception streamline, given that that particular population does, had such great evidence for success if they were diverted out of a shelter system. And the city responded very thoughtfully about how to support that community, extract them from the overall numbers, and then give different projections. How are we doing in terms of the other populations in that same vein? And how do seniors fit into that? Because, if I think about the low rise, like I thought that the mix of building types was a very interesting slide. I saw a big need for low rise. For me, having conversations with my residents about what kinds of infill they're going to see. If it's for seniors housing, it's a totally different conversation. Community support is a lot quicker, and it's felt by many residents who feel housebound, house rich, cash poor in my neighborhoods. Is there a strategy where we can advance seniors housing in such a way that it could be accelerated and removed from the overall equation? Or is there a striation of impacts that you're considering in the housing and homelessness refresh? I hope I was clear there.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. So the shorter answer is yes. So we do already separate seniors out in our 10-year housing and homelessness plan as a priority group that we're looking to tackle. As you've kind of noted here, each of these priority groups that we focus on in the 10-year plan does have separate objectives, things that we're looking to do for that. It's not as intentional on the development side to say we're specifically developing senior housing, but again, a number of the initiatives that we have done in the past, we have dedicated, as you're probably aware, housing with OCH for seniors. So we do try and build that out. It is concerning, of course, that we're seeing more seniors coming into homelessness. You've also very well articulated, we don't want that to be happening. So again, around seniors housing, we want to be able to do more wraparound supports. That will be another focus of making sure that people can stay in their housing in the long term and making sure that the existing housing they're in, if appropriate, people can live throughout their lifespan. So that's another big focus in our initial conversations for the 10-year housing and homelessness plan that is coming up, and a particular interest around that. And I might ask too, I don't know, David Wise is here from the strategic initiative side of things, if there's anything planned from the housing development side of it.
I don't think I have anything particularly to add at this point. Is there any particular clarification you'd like me to respond to?
Sorry, David, could you just speak up a little?
And I'm just wondering if I could get a clarification on the request for what would you like to, a little bit of more information.
Just, is there anything planned from the strategic initiative side for seniors housing, like specific focus on the development of seniors housing?
Okay.
Or
Thank
older
you. I
adult?
appreciate that. Okay, thank you very much. No, with respect to that, we don't have any particularly planned with respect to for seniors homes in particular. We do have a number of programs that are currently undergoing with respect to funding affordable housing capital projects across the city, working with nonprofit providers. There is nothing specifically geared towards any particular age or group. That is more geared towards income classification. So we're looking at providing supportive funding for transitional and supportive homes, but that is not necessarily geared to anything with respect to seniors in particular.
Okay, just as a follow-up, yeah, I won't preclude the work over the coming years, but I am curious as to whether or not, seniors, given the, silver tsunami that is coming, given the limitations of a fixed income, whether we might not see, and these are big generalizations, I don't know, but if we might not see characteristics of a population that, again, would be successful if diverted early, and although it might not be something we're looking at now, if there could be an argument to be made that those folks, similar or different to Ariel's question about high acuity, right? So these are kind of the different groups that you're going to have to weigh and balance in terms of priority and impact. And I'm excited for that. But I am curious as to whether or not seniors might also be considered as a high impact opportunity to divert before the pressure comes all the way forward. So it's just something coming alive for me. It's something that I think I can speak about quite easily in my community. And I put that forward as a food for thought moving forward. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yeah, if I can just comment, absolutely. Seniors would be one of the very advantageous group to have a very specific diversion strategy for. As Jesse had kind of went into, some of the biggest opportunities for us to maintain and stretch our resources as far as possible is maintaining those units that have rent control. If you've been in your unit for 20, 30 years with rent control in place, your rents are so much lower than what you'll be seeing when you come into the homelessness system and then try to get a new unit. So again, part of our strategy is going to be exactly what you're saying. Where are those opportunities to have our dollars stretched the furthest? That is doing housing loss prevention, providing housing benefits to maintain those low levels of rent. So our dollars go farther as a municipality.
And Councillor, I'll just add that as part of the older adult plan, we're going to be bringing that back to committee and council in the fall. We'll be working with the Council on Aging and other partners, working with older adults and seniors on exploring naturally occurring communities. So Kale talked about diverting from homelessness. We're talking about preventing and ensuring that seniors can, as much as possible, live in community as long as possible.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you very much. Data very much needed. Really appreciate it. Thanks very much for the report. In terms of older adults, as the liaison or co-liaison on older adults, I'm watching that file very carefully. And it's shocking to see at a place like Cornerstone how many older adult women, for example, are coming in. This is pretty crazy. The one thing that infuriates me is the fact that we actually have basic income for seniors. There's a lot of income programs specifically for seniors, and clearly they're not adequate, which tells you the situation in affordability out there. So that is something that has to be looked at too, and it's totally federal. So just throwing that out there because that's the pattern I'm seeing. When we do provide it, it's excellent. I was just in an OCH building yesterday, all seniors, and it's a great model, and it's an aging in place building where they're getting care. These are definitely models we want to look at. But having said that, complex care is important. That is something that Ottawa Community Housing is focusing on. I'm chair of Ottawa Community Housing, so that's So I'm hearing about it a lot. And I just want to know how we're dealing with the acuity rate. And if you want to take seniors as an example, you get high acuity as people age. And it's not just people that are homeless. It's people that are, change over years. And we want to keep people out of long-term care because as long as possible, and appreciate the programs like the NORC model that we've had a pilot project on. So anyway, just wanted your views on that.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. So absolutely, I think we need to be focusing on a whole variety of needs. And the way we're tackling that, and again, very excited with our housing and homelessness leadership table, is having the right folks around the table that contribute to housing stability. So we're working directly on that committee with community health centers. We're working very closely outside of that committee with Ottawa Public Health to look at how does our housing and homelessness plan have an equivalent health and housing plan that are doing some of those wraparound supports and outcome. We also saw in the recent supportive housing audit that the city is going to be undertaking, as our team, a number of initiatives to make that more intentional, to make sure that when we're building housing, we're looking at what's required for the wraparound supports, the healthcare supports, so that really it's much more packaged together so that we have a comprehensive approach when something's built. I'll just mention two things. In pre-development funding, we have two different buildings as a city as well that are specific for seniors. So those are going to be built shortly. So there is being work. And I think as an important piece of this, pairing together some of that work for now that we're in pre-development, making sure that we have those wraparound supports so people can age in place in that housing is also going to be really important. From an economies of scale perspective, of course, when you have these dedicated buildings, it's much more efficient to bring those on-site supports. So looking at those kind of opportunities, again, to stretch the dollars as far as possible, creating that sense of community and making sure that people have the ability to age in place or stay in the communities where they've kind of built their lives up.
Thank you. I have a question about some of the stats you were showing. It said there was, if I'm not mistaken, and please clarify, that there's a drop in demand for single-family homes. Is that what you were saying?
There are fewer single-family homes being built. And of course, you may want to speak to that. And family sizes are overall getting smaller, and we're seeing an increase in single-family or two-person households, according to census. How then that pertains to demand is nuanced on what people want. But as far as family sizes and what we're seeing being built, that's how single-family homes are represented.
Okay. And I won't pick on single family homes because townhouses and semis or whatever, family size homes are really important, and that's the most expensive to get developers to build. And we know that they don't like to go beyond 2-bedroom. And so Ottawa Community Housing is left to build up to 4-bedroom homes on a regular basis, sometimes 5, because of very large families. So that's another thing. And I don't know where that fits in the statistic. It's so skewed. We know that fewer people are having kids, but the ones that are having kids, there may be very large families. So I don't know how that fits into the demographics.
So certainly you're absolutely right. And not at all to suggest that larger family homes aren't needed, and certainly an issue when we look at wait lists and supporting larger families. So all is needed across. Thank you for that comment.
Thank you. And continued to press for the complex care, which Ottawa Community Housing is willing to do with partners. There's just no way we can do it without partners, and we have such excellent partners in our city. Because right now, having people go from homelessness to a unit without support will not make a successful journey. So I don't know if you have any further comments on that, but it requires operational dollars as well as the housing. Thanks.
Excellent questions. Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanagh. We have one more question from Councillor Carr.
Thank you. I was happy to see that there's looking like it's a planned reduction in shelter spaces, I think 150, if I was correct, over the next 10 years. Before I asked my question, I did understand that correctly, correct?
It is what we put in this scenario. It is distant from a recommendation or a plan, but it is, if you were to do this, then you might see this. But that, yes, 100 minus 150.
Okay, but we're seeing a big growth in transitional housing. So just for example, at the Y downtown, we're opening up Queen Street next week, purchased a building in Orleans. Is transitional housing, do we consider the folks in that kind of housing to be unhoused? Or do we consider that to be housed? And I have a little bit of concern. I think it's fantastic that we're moving people out of the shelter system. But if we're creating just an upper level of shelters under a banner of transitional housing, then that worries me somewhat. So I'm just wondering for a take on that.
So it's a good question. We do consider both transitional housing and emergency shelters you're still considered experiencing homelessness. So it is not considered housing. We want to be focusing on long-term supportive housing, people in their own units, with the wraparound supports if needed. That's really where we're focused. I absolutely agree with you. One of the things that we would need to do in this scenario in order to reduce shelter spaces is make sure these housing builds, and as you can see in the reduction scenario, are outpacing the number of inflows we have. So currently the city does not have the resources to be able to match the level of outflow in terms of new housing builds, new housing available units like subsidies with the rate of inflow for shelters. So that's one of the challenges. And we believe that the transitional model is a more dignified model than the emergency shelter system. Just getting more of a door, fewer people to a space so that we can really make sure we're bringing in those housing focused supports and focus on getting people into real housing.
Yeah, 100%. And of course, I've seen the operations of a shelter firsthand, having my office in one for a number of years. So is there any hope down the line or any thought that maybe eventually some of these transitional buildings that the city has purchased or leasing, that perhaps that will end up being supportive housing in the future? Is that a possibility on the horizon? I know we're just trying to deal with the current situation right now and making things better, and it's great that we have those spaces and we're no longer going to use community centers and we have a place to welcome people that's more dignified than a shelter. But are we thinking that longer term that may be what we want to evolve to?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, we have not, of course, the mechanism we do this, and it's only been since this 10-year plan that we have these new buildings available, but certainly the intent is to get rid of all shelter spaces. We do want to be focused on housing. There's lots of opportunities for these buildings. Like I think of St. Joseph, could be converted for housing. Again, we're not at that stage yet. We need to deal with what's in front of us, but the intent, as fast as possible as we can eliminate shelter beds for permanent housing, that's the intent.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Carr. I'm not seeing any further questions from my council colleagues. So we're going to take a quick break, regroup, and then we'll turn it over to questions from the media. So thank you very much, and we'll just take a short pause.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sébastien Tremblay, and I will be your moderator today. Je serai votre modérateur aujourd'hui. I will now invite each agency to ask their question in alphabetical order. You may ask one question with a follow-up. Nous allons maintenant répondre aux questions des médias qui pourront poser une question et une question de suivi. We'll now start with, nous allons commencer avec Arthur White-Crummy at CBC Ottawa.
Testing. Great. Thanks for taking our questions. The one thing I didn't see in the report is some kind of estimate of cost, unless I'm missing something, in order to keep up with these pressures and create these, I guess, roughly 10,000 new affordable units. Do we have a ballpark for how much that's going to cost?
So that's what we're going to be working through in the 10-year housing and homelessness plan. So once we make an update in terms of what the city's going to be targeting, working closely with the Alliance in terms of what mix we're going to tackle in terms of the reduction scenario. And then the step after that is we update our long-range financial plan, which would contain those updated targets and full costing of the plan.
Great. So we'll get more specifics later, but knowing what we know, is this something that is affordable for the city without support from higher levels of government?
Simply put, no. When you compare that reduction scenario, just for a comparison factor against what you see in our current 10-year long-range financial plan, we're a number like quite a ways away in a number of areas. So we would certainly need, again, more sustained and significant funding from senior levels of government.
If I could just get one more, because it's quite quick. The 129,000 new units that we'll need, does that assume, does that already take into account the funding that we have, like the Housing Accelerator, other programs that are building new housing, or does it not?
So there's the 129 and then there's also the 10,000. So the 10,000 is inclusive of what was known to would be built near the end of last year when we finished this. The 129,000 is not inclusive of that. That's based on population growth and estimations from HART.
Thank you. On va maintenant à Clémence Labasse avec le droit.
Bonjour, hi. I'm going to ask the question in English because I want to, the most specific answer. So first of all, I looked up the report and searched for the term addiction, and I found it being used only 5 times. So I was wondering if data about substance use was being collected during the study, and if so, is the data available or will it be made available?
Thank you for your question. Did you control F substance use too? Because I often use both interchangeably.
The draft, but not the study.
Okay. Yeah. So certainly we did touch on it, particularly in regards to some of the context that we added. There is a little bit of data on, I believe, causes of homelessness, of which substance use is mentioned. But as far as and as well as overdoses, if I'm correct, or fatal overdoses. Other than that, no, as part of this housing needs assessment, we did talk about it throughout, but that was the extent of the data. But certainly a huge impact on these numbers.
Yeah. So my follow-up question is, might there be a need or is there a specific strategy to address homeless people struggling with addiction and their housing need? I asked this question specifically in the context of the new Ontario bill. I don't have the number, but I think 10 or 11 that is measures respecting premises with illegal drug activity Act 2025 that says that landlords or it can be commercial but not necessarily could be prosecuted if they have awareness that there are substance use on their premises. So that makes people struggling with substance use a specific category with specific challenges in order to get a roof over their head. So is there a strategy being developed or will there be?
Thank you for the question. So as Bill 10 passing was early days, we're still working with our partners around what the strategy for this is going to be in terms of legal implications. The government has committed to doing some consultations on before this would essentially be in force on what that looks like. And we're certainly interested as the city and with some of our community partners being a part of those discussions. So at this point, we're looking at the potential implications of something like this and working with our partners to determine what it would mean in terms of the housing environment. But at this stage, again, because it's not actually in force, we're kind of just monitoring.
Thank you.
Merci. On va maintenant à Antoine Fortin avec Radio-Canada.
Antoine Fortin, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. We said that to reduce homelessness to 0, we had to add a good 10,000 units for in transition housing, subsidized housing. I'd like to know how realistic this is to aim for such a target of 0 homelessness. This is what we are doing now, analyzing the data in the report and consulting our partners for the plan for homelessness. And with this analysis and the consultation with the community and the partners, we will develop a report on the needed investments, especially from other levels of government, which would be really necessary for the city to proceed with our efforts to fight homelessness and other challenges. So you would also reduce the number of refuge for homelessness people. Well, we're aware that we need options for people depending on their needs. But we also know that the best solution is permanent housing. And it's with this optic that we're working. In the future, we're working to reduce the dependency on these refuge, to have more permanent options for people in need. Thank you. Camille Cloutier, Radio-Canada.
Hello, everyone. Let's go by for the house building for 2035. You're talking about 129,000 units. Do you have any collaboration with planners within the city, namely where to build these units and who will be making the decision? If I understand your question, you're asking if we're partnering with different sectors? Yes, I'm talking about the location of these new units. Internally, we're working with other services. We're working with the builders for permanent housing, but at the same time, we have partners within the community. We're working with the healthcare unit. We're working with drug users, drug fighting units, rehab units. And we want to have these units well located according to their needs. I have a second question. I would like to go back to the rents. You said that you don't have the control of market rent value. We know that this is a big issue. It just keeps on increasing. Is there a way for the city to control rents? Is there any way you can do that? In Ottawa, we don't have all the tools needed to fight the rent increases. We are mainly working with, let's say, the benefits that we can offer to renters, that can be offered to families. This will allow them, it's kind of a grant. It's called housing benefits. We're offering this to our clients. This allows them to pay their rent themselves. This is a way to counter the rent increase, but the City of Ottawa is not responsible for rent control.
One last question, and we'll go back to Arthur White-Crummey at CBC.
Thanks again. So I asked about cost earlier, but I also want to ask about the cost of doing nothing, just continuing the business as usual case. If we were to have this scenario with almost 15,000 people that experience, homelessness each year, what would that mean for the cost of city services, shelters, paramedics? Like what would this mean for our quality of life and sustainability within Ottawa?
Thank you. We did not do that costing or provide it, but I think it goes without saying the human cost to individuals and families and the trauma and harm that people face experiencing homelessness would be significant. Certainly emergency services, by law, shelter capacity, as you said, so crisis response, hospital. And so it would be significant, but we did not do that.
Just to add and reiterate, these emergency solutions, if we do not, we're not doing permanent long-term housing, are certainly much, much more expensive. Also, as we heard earlier today, when somebody is in a trauma environment, that does make those needs go up. So we would anticipate much larger costs on the emergency services, hospital services, that kind of thing. So again, it is imperative that we do the cheaper solution over the long term, which is doing those significant interventions that are noted in the reduction scenario.
Thank you very much. This concludes today's media availability and technical briefing. Ceci conclut la pointe de presse et la séance technique d'information d'aujourd'hui. Thank you. Merci. Have a great Friday.